Start recording on the mixer in 5. Get you pulled up your exclusive favorite. 5, 4, 3.
Welcome to the Awakened Collective, where we explore the topics of love, spiritual consciousness, and our divine purpose on this planet. Join us as we uncover the truth that our thoughts shape our reality. Welcome to the Awakened Collective. I'm Rick Gregory, and it is a pleasure to be with you this morning. It's been a minute. We had a couple of weeks of some sickness going on in the studio and then a guest, but we are back at it this morning and so glad to have you here with us. Thank you to Audio Alchemy Productions and Daniel Anderson for the gift they are to the world and helping us all get our stories shared, because our stories are so important. And may I remind you, as I always do, that you have never been separated from your Creator. You are the divine extension of your Creator's love on this planet, and we have never been separated from one another. We are all pieces of the same pie, my friends, all waves on the same ocean. Each individual wave may look different, like we all look different, but we are all connected. We are all the ocean. We are what we came from. We have a very special guest this morning, Miss Cassie Gottula Shaw. She is a mom of 2 and a wife to an incredible partner, a mystic, a writer, and a passionate lay theologian. She earned a master's degree in literature with a secondary emphasis on world religions in 2012. Since then, she's spent much of her time researching the lost history of Christianity, with a special focus on connecting Jesus to other ancient religions and spiritual traditions. Cassie is currently writing a book that's meant to help women recognize their cultural and religious conditioning while showing them how to embrace sacred wisdom and unlock spiritual liberation, the title of this podcast. Her work is represented by Candice Marie Benbow at Gardner Literary, who will soon be pitching publishing houses. In the meantime, you can find Cassie on social media. For discussion on motherhood, friendship, and mental health, you can search for Girl, I've Got You with Cassie GS. And for her thoughts on spirituality, religious deconstruction, and awakening, you can check out Lovely Rights, which is where I found this wonderful individual. Her posts are uplifting, encouraging, truth, setting people free. And that Facebook page, Lovely Rights, you need to check it out. She is a gifted writer. Her writing comes from her soul, from source, again, where we are all connected. In fact, one of her recent posts that I would like to read for you, it says, "When we finally discover that we are not and cannot be separate from God, a whole new life begins. We learn to turn within, and we find that the divine has been waiting there patiently." Does that sound familiar? That's what caused me to say yes to Cassie Gottula Shaw and like her page, and I've been following her ever since. So welcome, Cassie, to our podcast this morning.
Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be here.
We would love
That was
to
a beautiful
hear.
introduction. Thank you for that.
Thank you. We would love to hear from you today. As I said, actually, before we get started this morning, we've all been on a journey, and today there are things that I believe that I would have considered heresy years ago, and others would have as well. My beliefs have changed, and for me, there was a turning point in my life, and I'm sure that the things you believe today are probably not what you believed years ago. So we'd love to hear about your story and your journey to how you got to where you are today. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I am honored to tell you about this. So I was born and raised in small town, rural Midwest, in a very loving family with very strong Christian convictions. So I have a fairly common story about religious trauma and shame and the pain associated with having these paradoxical beliefs about an unconditionally loving creator who would also send me to a place of eternal torture for my mistakes or my mistaken beliefs, right? But growing up, I just fell in love with Jesus, the human being, and with his message and his mission. So there was a disconnect between the two that I just could not reconcile. I had this beautiful sense of spirituality when I was young, this sense of wonder and connection that unfortunately was snuffed out by the church and religious doctrine pretty early. So I think by probably about 10 years old, I was already struggling with anxiety and depression, and that would last for the better part of 30 years. Looking back on it now, I do see that there were many points along the path when I could have potentially reached a spiritual awakening. Always when I was in the depths of despair, like most people, I've reached that point many times, even as privileged as I have been, and I want to acknowledge that privilege. But I was still not a stranger to despair. The anxiety and depression were like the consistent emotional foundation. But then I also experienced, emotionally and physically abusive relationships. Or at 20, I was in an alcohol-driven single car accident that was completely my fault and that I was not expected to survive, and which I, to be honest, often wished I hadn't. There were also several more shame-related, alcohol-induced, rock-bottom sorts of situations in my 20s. And then in my early 30s, it was prescription painkiller dependency and addiction, which started as a result of an emergency C-section, and which for a time was useful in battling my chronic pain. Fortunately, I got through all of those things, and I'm very thankful to be alive and healthy enough today to tell you about it. But I've always been the person asking existential questions. And when I look back on all of these things, I see that there were so many moments when I was asking the bigger questions and having glimmers of these amazing, meaningful experiences, but I was just not quite ready to awaken. I think my ego probably needed some lessons first. And then around 12 years ago, I experienced kind of a renaissance of faith. I was studying world religions in my master's program, and I went back to church, to a seemingly progressive place where the pastor preached about the unconditional love and forgiveness of God, in a time when I was really struggling to forgive myself and to love myself. So it was beautifully reinvigorating at the time, and I kind of bought all the way back in. I went all in, and I was on fire for God. I was baptized for the second time, the whole kind of being reborn experience, if you will. Reading the Bible anew, especially the New Testament, I felt like I was being introduced to something completely new and different, something I had never known before, even after having grown up in a Christian home. And to me, it felt like I needed to be reading between the lines, even though it would take me a lot of time to figure out how to do that effectively. But from that point forward, I was spending all of my free time reading and watching faith-based content, going to Bible studies, and all of those things. But then over time, I started to realize that maybe some of the things that I'd once considered innocuous were really quite insidious. And I found myself writing all these notes of disapproval on the comment cards. I started reading more and more progressive material and realizing that the church's positions were not always in line with Jesus, and the biblical interpretations didn't always prove to be accurate. Sometimes they didn't even prove to be humane.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to look outside of the church to research the history of Christianity and the Bible. And I was really astounded to learn the truth about how various doctrines were created and about how the Bible was formed and that sort of thing. So then I started looking for evidence of the Creator in ancient traditions and religions where God was given different names, where God was conceptualized in different forms. And I started to make connections everywhere, just finding underlying truths that were consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I was gathering this intellectual understanding of source that matched the God of my personal experience. And I was kind of feeling pretty smug about it, to be honest. I was thinking, this is what religion should be. But my spiritual experience was still not what I dreamed it could be. And that kind of brings me to the crux of my story, I guess. The pandemic hit, and I got COVID a little while into it. And I was isolated from my family for 10 days with a pretty mild case. I didn't think too much of it. But in the months that followed, my body began to completely shut down. I was experiencing miserable gastrointestinal symptoms, debilitating fatigue, to the point that I was constantly nauseated and either vomiting or in severe pain. Was falling asleep throughout the day, all day, every day, sometimes even standing up, having conversations. And I just couldn't function in my life. So I was eventually diagnosed with post-COVID syndrome. And the most challenging parts of that lasted for around 2 years. So naturally, my mental health completely crashed as well. Yeah. And I was about as low as I could be at that point. I had everything that I had really dreamed about. If I had been checking the boxes on my life, meaningful work and beautiful children and all the wonderful things. But I was so in despair that I couldn't see the possibility of joy, and I didn't know if I could continue, And at that point, I stumbled onto a documentary that ultimately changed the trajectory of my life. And I want to say it wasn't specifically about the documentary itself or the content of it, but it was like a light bulb went off in my mind that said, now wait, you still have choices. I'd spent so long just wanting to feel normal again. And when I watched this film, I kind of went, well, normal isn't the best goal. Like, normal wasn't that wonderful. Normal was just getting by. And so I decided I want to pull through this, and I want a magical life. Life is supposed to be beautiful. And I made this decision, and I meant it, and I put all of my focus on it. The documentary was called How to Change Your Mind, and it's based on a book by the same name by Michael Pollan, I believe. And it taught about the history of psychedelics and how some had been used in other cultures for thousands of years, and how initially when they came to the West, they were used in the psychiatric field to help induce some spiritual and transcendent experiences, which subsequently help with emotional healing. And this was so far out of my comfort zone that if I had been in any other situation, I would have immediately dismissed it. But I was desperate. I had worked with traditional medications with numerous doctors, with nothing had helped. So I was just barely surviving and completely desperate. So I spent months doing the research. I talked to doctors about it as well. And I found safe and responsible ways to have a psychedelic experience. And I definitely encourage people to do their own research on this and talk to folks they trust. But I will tell you, the experiences that I had, it was almost like seeing truth for the first time in some ways. I experienced the absolute peace and loving presence of the divine. I experienced transcendence and oceanic boundlessness. I experienced a joy that I had only just barely been able to grasp at small points in my life. And I knew in the deepest parts of my soul that everything was going to be okay. But this is a hard thing on your body, and this is something that's meant to be a short-term type of treatment. So I wanted to learn how to have those kinds of experiences on my own after that. So I started researching a variety of interrelated topics on how to change your mind, how to rewire. So things like cognitive behavioral therapy, some neuroscience, metaphysics, healing hypnosis. I studied a lot of near-death experiences, just the general study of consciousness, those sorts of things. And I started reading books that just became life-changing. And at this point, I was starting to conceptualize God completely differently. A long time before this, I had dismissed the idea of the old man with a long beard in the sky. But now I was realizing that we're all a part of this multidimensional reality, and that all things in the universe are ultimately made of energy, vibrating energy. And spiritualists conceptualize God as the source or origin of this energy, right? So I began to see the human soul as really like a divine spark of this God energy or consciousness, which has come to this lifetime to experience the world and emotions in a way that only I can. And I was starting to realize too that these are common themes when you look at ancient spiritual traditions. It's not just a new age type of concept.
Yeah.
So for me, coming to the understanding that the divine is alive within me and that I'm an eternal part of everything, that we're all connected, that we're all one, it was like reawakening into the world, really. It was like seeing the world anew with childlike wonder again. I began to have that experience of kind of observing myself, and realizing that this body and mind I'm inhabiting right now isn't the complete and full picture of me. I'm kind of that being that can step outside and see what Cassie is doing, and that's a really cool thing. So I started to meditate regularly, and I learned the beauty of stillness and quiet. I started to marvel at things again. I started to understand some of the laws by which the universe is governed. And I started to pay attention to how my thoughts were creating my reality. I learned about neural pathways and how to kind of stop the negative spirals and to experience the present moment more fully, and how to focus on elevated and heart-centered emotions, higher frequencies, the joy, the gratitude, the love. I had the experience of my third eye being open, which was pretty wild. And now I have this consistent experience of when I'm raising my frequency, my vibration, which happens all the time, whether I'm driving or playing with my kids or anything, I can feel that as tangibly as I can feel my children's hugs or my cat in my lap. It's like this warm and fuzzy feeling in my head. And it's pretty cool. And when I coupled all of this spiritual and mental work with just treating my body properly, hydrating and eating well and sleeping enough and getting movement and getting rid of all the superfluous medications that my body absolutely didn't need, it started to heal as well. And it started pretty quickly. So I would say regulating my nervous system was huge for the healing of everything. It just changed everything. But that kind of brings me full picture. I started making connections between religion and the ancient practice of raising consciousness. I learned about the Gnostic Gospels, and everything in my research pointed to the fact that Jesus actually taught us how to access the kingdom here and now.
Yes.
That it was not about saving us from, an afterlife of torment, but that we're all on an ongoing journey. We all return to the afterlife of love, or the in-between life, or heaven or spirit realm, or whatever you want to call it, after this incarnation. But I think when Jesus taught about entering the kingdom, I think that was a two-part teaching. I think it was firstly about loving and caring for one another, entering into community. But also, I think it was about learning how to enter eternity while living in your present body as the person you are today. And I see that as being kind of the true salvation, being able to access heaven here and now.
Yes.
And when you awaken to these things, when you begin to understand these things and And I would say more importantly, when you begin to feel these things, it's the synchronicities start to appear,
crazy.
and it's
Yeah.
reaffirmed over and over and over that you're on the right path, right? And that's such a cool thing.
It is. It really is. I'm sure we've read a lot of the same books. And my
Right.
first experience was my son handing me a book called Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, who had a profound spiritual experience when he was quite young and wanted to relieve human suffering, and ended up being a medical doctor. And after quite some time as a medical doctor, realized that people coming in with sickness, that he identified that really it started in their thinking. So then he became a psychiatrist and had the largest practice in New York for a number of years, and then realized that it all began in the place where we were all connected, that place of source. And he went off by himself, left everything for quite some time, and came back to teach and to write about it. And I have learned so much from him. I think I've read everything he's written at this point. But you taught your experience that you shared um, with the transcendental experience, if you will. It sounds very much like what I have read with near death experience material, and I've read a lot of those books as well. I don't know. Have you ever read the book called "Dying to Be Me" by Anita Morjani?
No, that's new to me.
You'll have to check it out because I've read a lot of books and on the subject, and I have found hers to be by far um, more detailed than any other one I've read, and it is so uplifting. In fact, there's a story that and she actually wrote her story out, and somehow or other, Dr. Wayne Dyer got a hold of it and got in touch with her and asked her to write this book, and that he would get it published for her. And it's just profound. He said that he was giving copies of it. He gave a copy to his mother, who was in a nursing home not far from where she was probably going to be leaving the planet. And within a matter of days, she was running around getting copies for everyone in the nursing home, saying, "This is not our home." We're it was just it was really profound. But the experiences you just shared very similar to what she expresses when she's talking about this near-death experience. So it sounds like you really were able to see what we
Yes.
really are.
Right. Yeah. It's profound and just an extraordinary thing.
So
And now my spiritual experience it's almost constant. It's a whole different life. And I'll be honest. Of course, there are times when I'm kind of relating more to my egoic self than my higher self.
sure.
But I work through it and I use the tools and I get back on track. And I want the experience of being human. I mean, this is an incredible, unique experience that I want to have fully, but I don't want to get stuck in the suffering and fear. And so, I just work through it with
Yeah.
meditation and breath work. And I always feel connected to source, but I also feel connected to others in spirit guides, my beloved grandfather who I lost too early, and
Yeah.
to Jesus, to Mary Magdalene. And so I feel like I'm constantly participating and engaging with the mystical. I ask for signs and I receive them. I read a lot of channeled work. I also I practice this tool called automatic writing, which is something that helps me connect with my higher self. And it's just a really beautiful experience every time. I try to do it several times a week. And that's been pretty life changing for me too.
Talk to us about that. What is that about? What is that like? What is that all about?
Well, I learned about it through reading channeled work, where folks are either connecting to their higher selves or to higher dimensional energies. But automatic writing is when you ask for a connection to your higher self and you ask for the wisdom from your higher self. I usually start with several deep breaths, try to raise my frequency so that I'm kind of in the right headspace. And then I just start writing and I listen to the little whisper within. Sometimes it's a feeling, sometimes it's words that I'm hearing. And it's very different wisdom than the things I typically think.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how you can tell if is the egoic self speaking here, or are you really hearing from your higher self? And it's a really, really cool thing to do. And the more you practice it, like anything, the easier it becomes. And but it's pretty cool.
That sounds like I don't know if you've read the Conversations with God series with by Neil Donald Walsh, but that's very similar to, he would ask God a question, and then he would just wait for that intuitive answer. And sometimes I think one book took him over a year to write. He would just ask questions and leave it, walk away. He didn't want it to come from his, egoic or idyllic self, but would just wait,
Right.
and that answer to that question would come, and he would write it. And
Yes,
are you familiar with his material?
I am.
Yeah,
I've not read all of it,
yeah.
but I have read some.
It's really profound. I've been reading, and it's when you mention the word synchronicity, it takes me back to Carl Jung, and he wrote a book called Synchronicity. But when you begin to see that, and that is just that constant confirmation that you're on the right path. I will read a book, and the author will mention another author and a book that they read, or I will just pick up a book. The Conversations with God. I was at Barnes and Noble, and this book stood out to me. I'm like, Rick, do you really need another book? I mean, I was never a reader, Cassie, up until three years ago. Could probably count on my fingers how many books I read in my lifetime. Other than the things that you are required to read in school and so forth. But
Sure.
I mean, I never was one to just go pick out a book and sit and read it. And once my son handed me that book, I was off and running, and I've got a huge library now. But I was in the Barnes and Noble, and I saw that book, Conversations with God, and it said book 2. So I'm like, oh, well, obviously there's more than one book, and do I really want to start at book 2? And do you, Rick, you have enough books as it is, and you've got a few that you haven't read yet. Do you really need this? And I went to go put it back on the shelf, and I couldn't find where I got it. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm keeping this because I'm a stickler for putting things back where I found them, and I could not find where the other books were. So I kept it, and I read it, and man, it was a delight. And so I got the others. There's actually, is it 5 books that I purchased that are just really, really amazing. But I wanted to go back a minute, if we could, to the church environment, because I too had a spiritual experience very early in life at 19, and thought that I had found the truth. Actually, my ego said I had cornered the market on truth. I got very involved in church and Bible study, and with my wife and I at the time, and our kids, and did all the church things, and became an associate pastor for a number of years, and then a senior pastor of my own church for almost 5 years, I believe, and saw a lot. And here I was as a gay man, living the entire time believing that it was my feelings and my desires were evil, and doing business with this God who was going to fix me. And we know that didn't happen. And I finally got to that point, that, like you mentioned, that turning point where I recognized that I was loved the way I was. I was created the way I was. And then on this journey of realizing that it is all about my thinking. We even say that in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that we have a thinking disease. It's not about the alcohol or the drugs, which are symptoms. They're symptoms of a thinking disease. And it's our thoughts that shape our reality. And, I used to think that was hoo-ha, because I was in a church. I was in a church where people would put a wallet on the table and speak to it, that it was, it was going to be full of money. And it was craziness. It was, and so I reverted back, and we often do that. We'll pull from our past experiences and project them onto our present when they were illusions. And but seeing now that, I mean, we are here because of we are the ideas of God, and just like an idea can never be separated from its source. A Picasso can never be separated from the source of that painting. We can never be separated from our source, that we have always been forgiven, that I see, there is no sin. There are decisions we make that either serve us or don't, thoughts that we think that either create what we want or create what we don't want, and we learn from them and hopefully don't repeat them. I mean, really, it's as simple as that, isn't it?
Right. I think so. Absolutely.
So I just wanted to go ahead.
I was going to say, I love the Gospel of Mary, where Jesus mentions there is no such thing as sin except for that we forget the truth of our nature.
Yes. I mean, if we
That's
lived
really
in a world where everyone knew that they have always been forgiven, that we have never been separated from our source or from one another, that our thoughts shape our world. I mean, everything I'm looking at in this studio started with a thought. Everything we look at
hmm
started with an imagination, where it all begins, and that we can make a decision to choose how we think. I think that
absolutely
is liberating to me. I always
so
thought it
much
was
so.
so much more difficult than that.
Right.
So a couple of other things that I noted from your posts, I'd like you to touch on. One of them says you can love a human being enough to forgive him for what he misunderstands. You can love him enough to let go of your anger and to work toward true healing. But stay angry at the systems that lied to him. Stay angry at the structures of hate and oppression that continue to harm human beings. Don't let it be the kind of anger that eats away at your spirit or your love or your happiness or your health. Don't dwell in it. Don't let it harden your heart. Instead, just let it light a brilliant fire beneath your feet. Let it fuel your work in the world, for we have much to do together. Can you share a little bit about where that came from, or what your thinking and heart was, where it was at the time? What you were seeing?
Yeah. Um, I love so many people who are still caught up in painful dogmatic belief systems, and sometimes harm is caused because of that. But I love these people so much anyway. It's the systems that I see as being the problem. You know, we've got a religious system that is very much married to our political systems, and together they have caused a lot of harm. And I'm just hopeful that as we awaken, we can begin to change minds and change hearts, and that we can see the damage that we've caused in the name of God, which I think probably breaks God's heart more than anything.
Yeah. I look at my life and see that, even all the years that I was in church and in religion, that it served a purpose. And when we see people that are there, we know they got there because they were searching. They got there because they were looking for more, and so that's a good thing. And for me, I see that it was a almost like Jonah's whale experience. It kept me safe until I got to the other side, because as a gay man, if I did not have, if I had not the understanding of the love of God, and I was in that place of darkness. I don't know where I would be today if it weren't for the confining walls, and they were confining. I don't need them today, but they served a purpose while they were there for me. If that makes any
Right.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
So you also have, and you can safely reject all fear-based beliefs about God. Yes, you can. It is truly that simple. And then you mentioned the movement of hatred growing with fervor within Christianity has gone far beyond taking God's name in vain. It is intentional abuse of both humanity and the Creator. We must stand firm and reject it. We must counter with spectacular love. And that kind of goes to what you were just saying earlier, that experience that we have had, and that what we see going on right now. Love is really the only true force. And there are two emotions, fear and love, and fear is an illusion. And so many people are still so wrapped in that fear and acting out of that place of fear. And just by us being love, choosing to be love, um, it raises frequencies all around us. And like you said, that's what we are. We are energy.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I do recognize that, when we experience this hatred, it is coming from a fear-based place. And the more love that we can offer, the more healing that's going to happen. It's not always easy to recognize that, when you're seeing when you're seeing people suffer and when you're seeing harm being caused. But I'm really trying to lean into love today more than ever.
Well,
It's just so necessary.
I join you in that. So I know that we are here for a purpose, on purpose, for a purpose. And I choose to believe that we made the decision to come here for this particular time. And it took me quite a number of years to get to a place where I recognized that, that I choose my experiences, that I chose them, and everything is unfolding perfectly for us.
I love that you mentioned that. I wanted to recommend one of my favorite books and one of the kind of catalysts in my awakening is called Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton. And it's the first of a couple, but it through regressive hypnosis, it takes several case studies and goes through the journey, the process that the soul experiences, including the choice of a life. And it's really a beautiful book. I actually went and had my own experience of regressive hypnosis after that and got a lot of answers. It was a pretty cool deal, but I recommend that book to anyone who's curious about the journey of a soul.
Well, I'm going to get it, and I will post a link to it under our podcast video. And I've already forgotten the other one that you mentioned, but I'm going to go back and listen to it again. That's where I get my ideas for books, so I appreciate you sharing those.
You bet.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, so much to read now.
Yes, and I enjoy it. I really, really do. And it's just constant affirmation and confirmation, and increasing of my energy so that I could be of service to the world, which is where my greatest joy comes from.
Oh, mine too. Mine too.
Thank you for being with us, Cassie, my friend. It's so good to know you, and I'm so grateful that we cross paths, and it is just a joy to see that we are on the same journey and accomplishing much. I'm so grateful that you are feeling better and we're able to be with us this morning, and I want to let folks know how they can reach out to you. So I'm going to ask Daniel if you can put up our screen here. Cassie's got a lot going on. So for her thoughts on spirituality, religious deconstruction, and awakening, you can follow her on her Facebook page, Lovely Rights, and that's there for you. If you are listening by podcast, you can just search for Lovely Rights. And for discussion on motherhood, friendship, and mental health, you can search for Girl, I've Got You with Cassie GS, and that is also up there with the Facebook links for those of you who are watching this on video. And I'd also like to say that you could reach out to me. My webpage is theawakencollective.org, and you will find books that I'm reading out there that I highly recommend. I'm always adding to the list a couple of books that I have written. You will see links to all of my social media, including my YouTube page, which is where all of these videos can be found if you'd like to go back and watch some of these videos rather than scrolling a million times through Facebook to find them. My email is there, along with coaching services that I provide, including a complimentary call. If you want to just make an appointment to have a chat for half an hour, I would love to hear what's going on in your life and see if there's some way I can help you. I want to thank my guest, Cassie Gottula Shaw, again for being here today, and to Audio Alchemy Productions, Daniel Anderson. Until next time, my friends, love and kindness always.